friendship truly transcends kinship. For my son's sake or for my daughter's sake, I do every possible thing, including fake certificates and whatnot. Individuals are able to do what they want to do if the institutional climate supports them.
For those of you who haven't read the book, this is part fiction, part non-fiction, part novel. It's a book which is an ode to friendship between two men who start off as young boys and over the years talk about various things, and of course their career paths diverge at one point. But through this all, the friendship keeps growing stronger and stronger, and I just like to read this out to you. This is a story of the friendship between K and Munna, whose lives are inextricably intertwined with India's tumultuous history and Gandhi's teachings. The ingenious meta-fictional device of the book inside portrays a timely conversation between two nations, one of the past and one of the present. When K pieces together Munna's manuscript, feeling honor-bound to complete it, he discovers his late comrade all over again. Even as he grapples with India's complex political landscape and the challenges of upholding Gandhi's ideals in a rapidly changing world, the bifocal lenses of Munna's experiences and his own introspections serve as a turbulent reckoning. A novel, unlike any other, Thank You Gandhi takes readers into a liminal space beyond the confines of genre and invites them to confront the difficult questions of where we are and how we got here through a layered and rare exploration of male camaraderie. So that's a little bit about the book. Munna is a bureaucrat who is deeply inspired by the teachings of Gandhi, and he belongs to Bhopal. So along the way, the political landscape of the country changes, and at one point he simply cannot accept that Bhopal has been lost, in a sense, to the new Hindu nationalist party. So that sets off in his mind a whole lot of thoughts that he grapples with about how have these changes happened and how did we let this happen? And it leads him to having a conversation with Gandhi through the form of letters that he writes. And at one point, COVID strikes, he falls sick, and he entrusts these letters as an unfinished manuscript to K, his friend, who then takes on this task of giving it some form and shape and bringing it out in the form of a book, which is today Thank You Gandhi. So, Professor, I want to ask you right away, when I read this book as a parent and as an educator, I was concerned with how my children could be more engaged with the history of this country, because I saw that playing out in the lives of both the main characters in this book, of how they saw that their own lives were intertwined with India's past. But I see that children today are so disconnected with India's past, and all they're concerned about is, social media and instant gratification and things like that. So I see this as a problem of, education and maybe even the educator. So if we have to begin to engage with the topic of Gandhi, what's the way to do it? Where do we start? And how do we get young people in this country talking about these things?
Well, the simple answer is I don't know, because Gandhi is too distant today. And if we just introduce Gandhi as a great man or father of the nation and those kinds of things, I think our young people get legitimately bored, you can say. So the only way perhaps, you are a teacher, so you would know better, that the only way to introduce something without taking the risk of children rejecting that something because you have introduced them, is to perhaps to arouse their curiosity about this strange man, about whom Einstein in fact had said exactly what you are saying. If you visit Delhi's Birla House where Gandhi was shot at, there is a rock on which they have engraved Einstein's comment on Gandhi. And what he had said was that future generations will refuse to believe that such a man walked on this earth. And more or less, that's happening now. If you just introduce Gandhi through some anecdotes of his life or some of his writings or whatever, I think a 12, 14-year-old can be expected to say, I mean, do you really mean it? Or this is a nice story and something like that. Because it's very difficult to believe that somebody like that was around and was so much a part of the scene once that in this very vast country almost nothing could happen without Gandhi being involved in it in one way or the other. So perhaps the only way, in a short answer to your question, will be is to arouse this curiosity. And luckily now there are several books written for children that can be used for this purpose. In fact, there are comics on Gandhi, and certainly there are films and so on. And once somebody's curiosity is touched and aroused, I think one can leave them alone to explore things. When they need our help, your help or our help, they will approach us to understand it. But as I said to you earlier, Gandhi is much too distant, and he's certainly not in that sense a subject of that one can introduce through the syllabus. He's already in the syllabus. He's probably more than he needs to be in the syllabus, because syllabus is a great killer of interest quite often. So it's just as well that he is not so much in the syllabus. And if somebody gets interested in him, perhaps they will find a way to approach Gandhi. I mean, I'm sure Bahrisons itself will have right now maybe a dozen books on Gandhi, small and big. And these are the ways, I mean, these are the things that will take them along.
So that again underscores the need to read and read widely to understand Gandhi.
That's an important point. I mean, maybe I shouldn't take this long to put this across, but the problem with men or people who reach that kind of status in a nation or in the world is that then their quotations begin to get separated from their context. Right. So if Gandhi said something, let's say in 1915, it can suddenly become a context-free quotation. Oh, see what he said. How can he say like that? Well, Gandhi was constantly changing his views, growing with times, and so 15 years later he may well have said something quite the contrary, or something that gives it a wider sort of meaning. But such is the problem of these stray quotations that flow in particularly our times when the media are so fragmented that it's possible for somebody to get stuck with one thing that Gandhi said, and then they say, just say for example, caste system. You will find so many people saying, oh, he supported the caste system, I don't want to have anything to do with him, or something like that. It's quite possible without actually seeing what it meant to grow up with the caste system in his time, and at one point realize what it is. So Gandhi needs patience, and as you said, quite wide reading.
Yes.
And the willingness to see that there must be something about the man that he became Gandhi.
There's a reason why so much was written about
yes.
him.
So some sort of, you can say, interest plus some degree of trust that there must be something to it. Let me find out, and so on. I mean, that's probably but you are the history teacher. I mean, you should answer this question, because I'm sure.
No, I'm asking this question because I know how difficult it is to make children read.
Yes.
So, so this is why I want to frame this as a problem of education and the system of education we have. So that's how I saw this book throughout.
Okay.
That if I have to make this relevant to, and I raise two different generations. I raise a Gen Z and a Gen Alpha. They're 10 years apart, my kids.
Okay.
So you see, but the problem for me personally is very pronounced. While we do try to, in some ways, live the Gandhian way, let's say, not very consciously though, but because my husband practices sustainable farming, we have that consciousness in the family about what it means to lead a simple life, to be good to nature, to not waste resources and so on and so forth. But I'm not sure that's enough.
That may be true, but at the same time, symptoms of Gandhi are all around us.
Yes.
And symptoms are really enough for time. We don't, when introducing a man as a very big figure is one way to dissuade people from getting to know him better. I mean, right now in this room, for example, when I look at my own bag or somebody's dupatta, it's a reminder of Gandhi. Something made with your hands is a reminder of Gandhi. I mean, any craft work so, as you said, there are so many ways in which Gandhi continues to be present in our midst.
So once Pankaj Mishra wrote in one of the articles, like he said that the biggest disservice that we did to Gandhi was to present him as a Superman. That he did that. We never really presented the journey in the textbooks and all. And so he wrote a beautiful article in London Review of Books, I remember. So it was about like presenting Gandhi as a Superman. So like I think that movies like Munna Bhai MBBS, I believe, they teach us Gandhism without really teaching us those heavy jargons. Let's say, for example, moment we utter this word satyagraha in our classes, students they start yawning, or at max they start writing because they have to cram, and that's so it's a lot rests upon the teachers how to present Gandhi as a struggle, Gandhi as a choice, as a very conscious choice, as a way to live their lives in a way which is full of I would say a lot of tumultuousness, I don't know, a constant struggle with no clear choice, muddy waters, and like then wading through those muddy waters.
Yes, Marjorie Sykes wrote a book about him. She had worked with him.
Yes.
And she and Jahangir Patel wrote a book which is kind of somewhat biographical of Gandhi. And this title is Gandhi, the Gift of the Fight. Gift of the Fight. That and as you read that book, you realize that wherever there is any act of resistance, there is Gandhi. Wherever you see signs of a fight being taken forward by words or by talking and by quarrel or by doing something to say that, look, don't take me for granted, there is Gandhi there somewhere. Whether it's in a family or in a assembly or in a school, in a college or wherever. That is one thing in which he left his mark. That the act of resistance is actually an assertion of the self. And it need not be taken as being inimical to something else, but rather as an expression of the self. And that is something in the context of childhood is a very important point to remember, that when a child is, especially when the child is getting to be an adolescent or a teenager, this idea of resistance, maybe to the father, to mother, to whoever, itself is an expression of selfhood, and parents need to be congratulated when it begins to happen. That you have brought up a child who knows how to assert himself or herself. And that is something that Gandhi turned into a political art, into a social, a fact of social living and so on.
So I have a question here. So you included this particular book, Nora Webster, and there was a particular reference to belief.
Yes.
So I have a question, sir. Does love come first or does loving come first?
That's a tough question. I suppose loving would come first, to my mind, because love as a concept, you kind of engage only after you've had some experience of being in love with whatever. And as a word, it doesn't really matter, because you may not know the meaning of the word. In any case, it's known by different names in different languages. But the real thing is that experience. And someday somebody will say, so you have been in love. Right. Which is good to know that that's what I was in at that point.
Because that might be the key to, I don't know, maybe to reach Gandhi. Because believing in Gandhi, does belief come first or does believing in Gandhi come first?
Actually, in that episode that you are looking at, the distinction is between belief and faith.
Yes.
And faith seems to be something that we have now outsourced entirely to religion or religious life. But faith is something more than that. I mean, for example, if Deepta is my teacher and I have this faith that what she will say will not be baseless, then that is more than belief.
Right.
A belief can be someday you may discover that, I believed in him and look, I've been cheated now. But if you had faith, then even that act of cheating will be covered by that broader faith that maybe my friend was wrong and he didn't realize what he was doing. And so faith will continue.
Right.
And in Hindi we express it very nicely by the fact that by this word astha as opposed to vishwas. And it's true that religion demands that.
Oh,
even if
absolutely.
you are a great believer and some calamity happens to you, instead of blaming God, if you are a person with faith, you would see this in the broader canvas of God's design, and you would wonder why
This happened.
why I have been made to face this calamity. But if it was only belief, that day you will say, well, God has cheated me, so I'm going to forget about him and carry on with my life.
So this was perhaps like one of the best chapters on maybe these pages, this conversation that you've written about belief. Like it was absolutely gripping, and it keeps you wondering for a while. Oh my God! Like how did it come to you? For example, is there a particular experience that maybe inspired you to write this part?
That's a tough question, yeah, because I've had several experiences.
This was really the best part, one of the best parts of the book.
Really, I'm so glad that you liked that, because this question as to why things happen in a certain moment is very difficult to answer. If you believe entirely in science, then you would say it was just a coincidence. Whereas if you have some degree of faith, or if you are even a slightly religious person, you would see some meaning in that momentary happening. I can't resist the temptation to tell you and our audience today this quite remarkable happening in my life. I was far away in a Scandinavian setting where I was completely alien to the world around as a student in that moment, and suddenly I got a telegraphic message from my mother that my father had passed away. Now for me to first arrange the money to get back home, and all that was weighing on my mind, and I just didn't know what it meant now that I'll go home and my father won't be there. And I had no idea how sick he had been or anything. And in this strange sort of lost, self-absorbed mood, I was just sitting when suddenly my hostel bell rang, and I went out to see who it is, because I knew nobody in that city actually. And on the steamer to Stockholm, I had met a priest, and the only thing he knew about me was that I was in one of the hostels of the university. And lo and behold, he was there. He came in, I told him, look, I have lost my father, I have to travel immediately. He sat down as if he kind of knew. And he gave me a long kind of discourse on death, which brought not just tears to my eyes, I just started crying. And it seemed as if he was very satisfied that I was crying in his presence. And after some time he left, leaving me completely puzzled as to how at that moment he showed up. Where did he find the exact address of this hostel or this wing or this room or whatever? And it really felt like one of those incidents where you feel as if some higher connections are happening. And I felt that I was now ready to travel. I could cope with what had happened in my life, to live the rest of my youth fatherless. And that kind of, so what I'm saying is the same thing could be interpreted differently. Say perhaps you had given him somewhere you had given him a clue about where you would stay in Lund in Sweden, and he happened to be there that day. He was coming to see somebody else, he saw you. Don't make too much out of it. It was just a coincidence. You can say that about almost any incident like that in life. One can say that it has this dimension which is a bit inscrutable, and that dimension which is obvious, which is a day-to-day kind of dimension, and we dismiss things like that. So ultimately it's a question of what gives you more peace of mind, or what makes you appreciate something that has happened more,
So I want to bring the focus now onto the friendship aspect of this book, because
Yes.
that is what the bedrock of the book is. It is a story of friendship between two boys. So when I read the book, I figured maybe it was K's friendship with Munna that led him to understand Gandhi differently or better much later in life. Had the manuscript not come in, would K have still made the effort to dig deeper into Gandhi and, find out more or better his understanding of him, if not for that experience?
I don't think so. I think K, as a character in this book, is thoroughly cynical.
Yes.
Unlike his friend Viresh Pratap Singh, whose nickname is Munna, who has spent his life as a civil servant, and as you know, civil servants, no matter what their quality as a civil servant, they are dedicated to the state. They have to serve politicians, ministers. So he has led his life like that as a civil servant, as a fairly dedicated civil servant. But K is a kind of a freer bird, and
Both of them envy each other at different points, it's quite interesting actually. He envies him because of his mother's love for him, and so there are these little things. But so I that's why I was curious to know whether it's this deep friendship that really made you go, or made K go over the line, And does that also mean then that to engage with Gandhi, you need someone so strong in your life to push you to be able to,
no, there's no such lesson. But as far as the friendship is concerned, I think that when I was writing was a major theme. It happens at the end of Shakespeare's Hamlet. If you remember the last scene, the stage is littered with dead bodies. So many have been killed in that last scene. And Hamlet also is about to die. He has been so badly injured. And the only person who is around is his old friend Horatio.
Correct.
And the dying Hamlet says to Horatio, I know how you feel, Horatio, but you must live on. Why? To tell my story. Now that is exactly the kind of, you can say, analogy which works in this book or in this story. That here is an intimate old childhood friend who has died in COVID. And he has entrusted some work to his friend, an incomplete manuscript. And this friend, who is otherwise now an old man, he's quite cynical about things and so on. But he fights with himself to say, why should I bother about this? Yes. And he's no more. And the moment he thinks like that, it goes the other way, saying, he's no more, but does it mean that I should just ignore his word, his last words? Or, the fact that he wrote to me this email saying, please do something with what I have been working on. Civil servants write, the only book many of them write is after their retirement. And so he doesn't know what this book is all about. That's one thing. You are a relative. When I came to Chandigarh, a lot of people asked me, does this place attract you because, you have some relatives here? And over here, I realized that it's friends who matter much more. There's no relative in this audience today. I had informed one of them, and they didn't come. You're all friends. That's right. So, and during this book also, I realized that friendship truly transcends kinship.
Yes.
Friendship is, if there's anything comparable to it, it's the relationship between a teacher and a student, which grows through knowledge. And friendship also grows through mutual shared experiences, things we do together and feel good about it, and come so close as friends that once one of them, if one of them dies, it doesn't matter to the other. He lives in his world, in his memory, and in his life, or what is left of it. So in that sense, it's truly a celebration of friendship, as Namita Gokhale has called it in her very nice endorsement. And I certainly enjoyed that dimension of this book when I was working on it. Gandhi is definitely a major character in this book.
Yeah.
But this friendship really is almost like the key metaphor.
Yes.
For a country like ours, where we are so tied to the family, we are willing to be corrupt for the sake of bringing some good to somebody in the family. For my son's sake or for my daughter's sake, I do every possible thing including fake certificates and whatnot. Our country is haunted by the notion that I must do something, just because that person is my blood relation. Caste, kinship, all of these are very deeply entrenched Indian categories.
Correct.
And as I was writing, I thought, friendship is so much more important, and maybe that's the heart of democracy. That those you know, those you work with are not related to you, but we are together in this. And that's how this character emerges, really acquires his full meaning for our writer. I mean, this in this book.
There's this brief cameo by Professor Yashpal in the initial chapters.
Yes.
I don't know how many of you remember. Professor Yashpal used to write for the Tribune, and when I was a kid, I used to read it very often. And when he passed away in, I don't know, maybe 2016, 17.
16, yes.
And I called up my friend, he was in France. I called him up and I said that Professor Yashpal has passed away. So he was, and we did a 2-minute silence for him. Because we grew up reading his brief anecdotes on science and all. So why did you include Professor Yashpal? And it did bring up a lot of memories for me. Professor Yashpal is there. This book's now hold a lot of weight for me now.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
And the moment when he says, "Oh my God, the country is gone," so when Professor Yashpal says that, it holds now even greater weight. Professor Yashpal, because we have seen him, we have read those anecdotes, and I still remember perhaps he used to appear on DD1 as well.
Yes. And he used to write in Tribune.
Yes,
that column of his continued here for a long time. Yes. Right. Well. You see, the non-fiction aspect of this book is that with the help of some living people or known people, I have entrenched it in our times. It has become a contemporary book, even though, as you must have noticed in chapter 1, the most romantic parts are from the early 50s, after independence. Yes. And you feel very kind of warm and very nice to remember that period, which we all, those of us who lived in that time, think that it was a nice period, and so on. Nehru's India, and nature was alive. There was no environment crisis. Nobody was asking you not to eat this or that or leave the light on. It didn't matter in those days, and so on. Life was freer in that sense. So to contemporize it, so to say, I don't know what the word will be, to bring it into present day, this book uses a lot of actual names and characters. And Yashpal is there, Aruna Roy is there, as you must have, Medha Patkar is there, Vandana Shiva is there. Number of these names are there, and some names which are slightly controversial have been fictionalized. So it's a mixture of real people and not so real people, but those who have been around the last 20 years will know who we are talking about. But in my life, I'm not talking now as a writer, but as a teacher, as a education person, Yashpal was a very transformative figure. I worked with him for many years, and in my next book there will be much more about him, his life, and so on. He was a very, you can say, rare person. Physicists always say that he was a giant, and I'm sure he was in his field. But as a human being, as a teacher, as somebody who was so comfortable with children, he was an extraordinary figure, with not a trace of arrogance about him, not a trace of this sense that, I'm a very important scientist, or I got Padma Vibhushan and all that stuff. There was none of that. He was, nor was he somebody who was self-effacing in the sense that he was very humble or deliberately very modest. No, he was just who he was. And if you knew him, you would know what I'm talking about. So in that episode where you meet him, I thought his presence sort of illuminates the moment and also takes the story a little forward, because he was among those people who was actually very worried at the time when he died. A lot of things were happening that were very unpleasant to him, and he used to really worry about the times that are coming. That somebody who was truly a nation builder in that sense. Man who used a bicycle carrier to fly, put balloons in the air for weather prediction, later on put satellites in the air for India, and was a great nuclear physicist, a member of the nuclear winter group of the world. He, if you talk of science, he was up there. He was among the topmost scientists in the world. He had worked with Bhabha, he had worked with Nehru, he had worked with all kinds of things. So for him to worry about the future of science and the future of India was the same thing, literally. And he was not somebody who liked spectacular science or something. To him, science really meant making people's lives better, making life more capable of being understood and enjoyed more. That was his notion of science. And the ease with which he introduced science to children is something I have never seen anywhere, in a school or a college, university, you name it, or a film. Yashpal, as you know, was a full-fledged film. in his, if you spent half an hour with him, you knew that you had done something very special which will never go out of your memory. So his presence there, to my mind, gives this book is a nice place in today's world.
I was intrigued by your expression that syllabus is the killer of education.
Yes.
How would you relate it to what's happening now?
Yes, today is a very difficult context because the syllabus itself has become a fighting ground, and not for the first time. And teachers have very little say about what should be taught, what need not, or what is wrong to be taught, and so on. So it's a difficult time, and I don't think anyone, let alone Yashpal, would feel comfortable with what's going on in the world of syllabus. I mean, we have an eminent history teacher in our midst right now, and you can ask her how she feels. I've been to her school, I have met her children, and I know how they feel about some of the things that they have to endure. Much of the syllabus today really tests your endurance. Can you endure this much nonsense? And that probably has some educative value. This feeling that, I can endure this nonsense, this insanity, and I'll forget this all after the exam is over. Because that's how we pin our children down to studying what's prescribed. We pin them down by giving them this threat that, you won't get through the exam if you question it now, question it later. The whole life, your life is there. So there is a problem there. And this problem reflects some deeper problems of both education and our country today. How we lost education to politics, you can say. That's the simplest way of putting it across.
So, okay, I want to highlight the Hindu-Muslim divide that forms a large part of this book, towards the middle and towards the end. And I think specifically in this part of the country, that feeling is very pronounced because of the partition.
Yes.
And Gandhi becomes an easy target, as is evidenced in what you've said in the book as well. So I want to flip this around and, imagine a situation if the partition had not happened, let's assume. Would the other, or the Muslim, feel much safer in an India that was undivided? Yeah. Because we are still seeing, a lot of violence against them. Would the partition have changed that in any way? Had it not happened? Would India still be a safer place?
See, I've dealt with this question in an earlier book, which was about textbooks in India and Pakistan.
Right.
Prejudice and Pride. And in that, I deal with this question as to how things would have been had there been no partition. I mean, basically, this is a kind of a hypothetical question or a counterfactual question.
Yes.
Because we have to live with partition.
Yes.
It's in the past. And the only way to live happily or with peace is by accepting the past. What happened did happen. And in this book, this issue, of course, is very major, not in the context of partition, but in the context of Bhopal.
Correct.
Because Bhopal remained a very composite society despite partition for a very long time, and began to fray only in the 70s after the defeat of Pakistan in the war that gave birth to Bangladesh. It's after that, as you'll see from Bhopal's portion in this book, that Bhopal's community began to break apart.
Correct.
Yes, Bhopal was also affected by partition, as we know very well. And the fact that Bhopal had survived this long itself is an indicator that partition was not inevitable anywhere. I mean, there are people far more knowledgeable than I am about partition who have said that there were so many things. I mean, I have the greatest respect for Krishna Kumar, who had witnessed it and who wrote extensively about it, and who said that, you know, both sides made terrible mistakes. This to happen. Her famous book, Gujarat se Gujarata, Gujarat in Pakistan and Gujarat in India. That's the book in which she narrates this kind of story of partition. But here in this book, the episode where I thought Gandhi and Punjab's experience of partition come to some sort of resolution in the description of the farmers' agitation, which remained in a broader sense a very Gandhian movement for more than a year, and were ensuring every hour, every day, every night that no violent incident happens to spoil our movement. And there one of the speakers was Bhagat Singh's niece, who came there. And this is the one question which is constantly asked if you are a teacher and you have taught something about Gandhi. Inevitably some student will ask you, if Gandhi was so great and so on, why didn't he ask the English to not hang Bhagat Singh? I mean, that is one thing that people still remember about Gandhi, that he didn't do much, which of course is not true. Ramchandra Guha in his biography of Gandhi has given full details about what Gandhi did, try and so on, and we overestimate his his importance for the British when we ask that. But in this particular episode about the farmers' agitation, I thought we bring together the spirit of Gandhi and the spirit of Punjab and its memory of partition. That despite that horrible memory that our province has gone through, Gandhi still holds some mysterious presence to make that movement not only happen and sustain for more than a year, but then actually win.
Right, absolutely.
I mean, there's a famous quotation of Gandhi which applies entirely correctly on this movement. He says, first they laugh at you, then they ignore you, then they fight you, and then you win, which is exactly what happened to the farmers' movement. And ultimately those 3 laws were withdrawn, which was the main demand of the movement. So you can say, yes, that way Gandhi made his presence felt here, where his soul actually wept after partition. As you know, nobody was more heartbroken than Gandhi.
One last question, just one last, because you've headed perhaps the biggest institution of the nation, NCERT. My question is like very simple. I've been asked this question a lot of times, and I still do not really know what's the right answer. Who's more important when you're heading an institution? When you see it from there, who's more important, an individual heading the institution, or is it the institution?
Well, this is a sort of almost a theoretical question, and from my experience, I can tell you that individuals are able to do what they want to do if the institutional climate supports them. And I was lucky to be its director when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, or when Arjun Singh was the Human Resource Minister, and all that mattered so much for me to function in the National Council. Had it been some other period, I would have thought myself as a great failure. But the fact that I remember that whole experience with such nostalgia and happiness of success is because of these circumstances in which an institution which was otherwise very, you can say, greatly weakened, had been battered by various misuses of it, came alive and came together again. So institutions really do function, and depends on under what circumstances you meet them or you happen to be there. So I would hope that young people especially would read, but I'm sure older people will be happier with this book, which is fine with me. I mean, reader old or new, it's always welcome.
So I think this book is perhaps like more for those who are slightly younger. Because जैसे एक particular चीज़ है, I'm very active on social media, and when you post, I'm sorry for saying this, when you post a low IQ stuff, something which is low IQ, it does not get any engagement. But suddenly when you post something which maybe stimulates your thoughts or maybe makes you pause, तब it goes viral. Contrary to what we believe. इस particular book में सर there were a lot of moments where you would जैसे normal course of life में हम जो चीज़ें देख रहे हैं उसके सामने जैसे वो आपको दिखेगा and you would pause और वो वाला it has a lot of those moments where you would want to pause and think about ये तो मेरे साथ भी हुआ था और मेरे context में actors अलग-अलग थे.
Thank you so much for being so appreciative. आप तो यूपीएससी एस्पिरेंट्स की टीचर हैं, तो सिविल सर्वेंट्स आने वाली दुनिया की अगर इसको पढ़ेंगे तो आई एम श्योर
इट्स गेटिंग रिकॉर्डेड सर, लेकिन
ऑफिसर्स विल बी ऑफ अ बेटर क्वालिटी.
एक मेरा फ्रेंड था सर, वो जब वो वहाँ लबासना में वेयर दे गेट ट्रेन्ड एंड ऑफिसर्स मसूरी, तो वहाँ पर बैठा हुआ था एंड प्रताप भानु मेहता वाज एड्रेसिंग देम. And suddenly, like, he asked a question on violence. Would you use violence on these people or not? A lot of people unanimously said yes, we will use violence. And he got up and he said, "God save this country," and he left.
If civil servants say that, you can imagine what that
Shekhar
means.
was mentioning interestingly that Hind Swaraj is mandatory reading at the UPSC level.
Not but a lot of questions they get asked. So we made
to
it a
answer
point.
questions in the exam.
A lot of questions they get asked.
They said they replied like this because they were trying to impress him. Yeah, it's right.
Yeah.
We can open the floor for questions. Yes, please. You've all been holding.